Welcome, welcome. You know what, can we turn the volume just a tiny bit higher? Just because I don't want to, I'm getting a little lazy with these microphones. I don't want to project my voice. I think this is good. Thank you. Thank you, Jim. So, good evening. I was thinking about this bell. When the bell rings, there was a time when I first started a meditation practice, and then I would come to like group sits like this, and I would be like holding on for dear life, just waiting for the bell to ring. And then the bell would ring, and like, oh, thank goodness. You know, this feeling. I didn't even notice really how much I was like couldn't wait for the bell to ring. Maybe I was in like some physical discomfort, or maybe just some mental discomfort. Or there would be times when I would realize that, you know, again, I'd be in a setting where other people are meditating, and there would be just, I don't know what would happen, but something like, oh, I can't meditate. And then I just said, okay, well, I guess I'm just going to sit here. And I would just just totally stop meditating, pretend to meditate. I was trying not to wiggle too much, but you can't help it when you're not meditating. You're shifting your weight around. And I remember reporting this to a teacher, that I would just like give up and then just wait for the bell to ring. And this teacher told me, you know, what you're actually doing there is cultivating aversion. Just this, you know, waiting, wanting something to happen that's not there. So there's this way in which we can practice, you know, with this effort, or, you know, just really striving hard, or really just being kind of lackadaisical maybe about it, or there's a way in which we're kind of present. Not completely present, but not completely lost in thought either. So I'd like to talk a little bit about this tonight. This idea about balanced efforting, like the right amount. We might say wise efforting. And this is certainly part of the art of practice, is to know like how much like efforting to be doing. Even like the whole notion of efforting, what does it mean to apply effort to a mindfulness practice, to a meditation practice? And it's not uncommon to be a little bit over-efforting, this sense that we're straining or striving, and maybe we don't notice it so much in like a 30-minute sit like we did tonight, but when you're on a meditation retreat and you're doing sit after sit after sit, you just start to run out of energy. You're like, what happened? You get exhausted, and but all you're doing is just sitting. And so you start to notice, oh yeah, there's this straining, there's this quiet striving, this pushing. And of course we bring this to our meditation practice, because chances are we've been doing this type of way of attaining in other areas of our life, in our professional life, in our academic life, with our hobbies, with almost most endeavors that we do. There's a certain amount of like pushing that we do to get through, to make it to the end of it, or to achieve something. And, you know, in some ways there is a little bit of having to apply some effort, but it's really kind of, we might say, it's kind of like riding a bicycle, where, you know, in the beginning you have to pedal, you have to apply some effort, but then you can coast. And there can be a way in which over-efforting, then we get out of breath and we can't go so far on the bicycle. But if we are pedaling in such a way that it's sustainable, then we can ride our bikes further and in all maybe different types of terrain, through the city and out of the city and into the country and to the next town, and these types of things. Because meditation practice, I mean, we're here and we're doing a formal 30 minutes with a beginning and an end. And there's certainly some real benefits to that. But there's also, mindfulness practice that we're doing in our daily life. That is just being embodied for our life, being present for our life, bringing a certain amount of awareness, a certain amount of attention, a certain amount of mindfulness. So there's the amount of effort to do during a formal meditation period, as well as this type of effort to do when we're expanding the mindfulness to be in our daily life. And they're related, of course they are. Maybe I'll just say in a daily life, it's less common that there's a lot of serious straining in our meditation practice. What I mean by daily life is like just bringing some mindfulness to some of our activities. In particular, some people find it easiest to do this on activities that we do a lot or that have a certain repetitious nature to them. Obvious examples are doing the dishes, brushing one's teeth, or folding clothes. There's something that has this certain rhythm to it. So chances are with those type of activities, we have just this light sense of being embodied. And then part of the question is, and that maybe I should back up and say, and that light sense of being embodied is a tremendous way to really bring some fullness to our lives, instead of to just be mindlessly just going through our lives as if it didn't matter what we did. What matters more is what we're cooking up in our minds. But there's this way in which this more gentle type of mindfulness that we bring to daily life is appropriate for being the more formal in a sitting meditation, because there is this way in which straining, we might not even recognize it, but what's fueling the straining is this subtle sense of whatever's happening here is not okay. I have to go find something else. I have to go make something else happen. So either we don't want to be experiencing something, so there's this very subtle way, we're kind of dismissing whatever experiences we're having, thinking that the next moment's going to be better. So there's this kind of this straining, this leaning into a certain amount of greediness for the next moment, because we don't like what's happening here. And there's this way, I'll use this language, kind of greediness for the next moment, is really also tied up with this strong sense of me. I like things this way, I don't like things that way. I like it when it's quiet, my body is perfectly comfortable, and meditation period is not too long. Of course, but how often does that happen? And this meditation practice is so much about being able to show up for our life no matter what is happening. No matter what is happening. So even if we might have the sense I don't want this, or we might have the sense that I do want that. And that's another way in which can be this straining. There's a big sense of effort. And this often we wouldn't even notice that we're having this sense of effort unless maybe we compared it to practice in daily life, or we compared it to an experience we have when we've been on a meditation retreat, maybe some longer meditation, and we have this feeling oh yeah, okay, we've been riding the bicycle, and now there's a certain amount of coasting. There's a certain amount of momentum that arises. And this is a natural thing that happens, this momentum, just a few moments of mindfulness, they start to support one another, and then there doesn't have to be any effort so much anymore. It's just mindfulness is arising. So how can we apply the right amount of effort that the practice is nourishing and supportive and sustainable, and not something that turns into a grim duty? I'm supposed to do this because it's good for me. Or like, eating our taking our vitamins, eating whatever vegetables we don't like but we think are good for us, or doing some exercise that we think that we should do that we don't really want. We don't want meditation to turn into something like that. But then, the risk is that, okay, well, then we're just going to chase whatever it is that makes meditation pleasurable. So I would say that meditation is about practicing in a way, or maybe persevering in a way that has in a relaxed manner. And this relaxed manner is a lot about being receptive to what's arising, as opposed to going out and connecting with something and really working to stay with that object. There are times in which that style of practice is appropriate. And there's times when this style of practice of just being more receptive, like there's a sense of receiving the objects of meditation, receiving the experience of the breath, receiving the sounds. And this way of receiving is a way in which there isn't so much a sense of preferences. Isn't so much a sense of, I want this, I don't want that. But it's more of a sense of allowing and accepting and just noticing what is the next thing that's being noticed. This has a very different flavor to practice in this way. This idea of being receptive. One way in which it's different is that really highlights actually how little effort is required. If I were to ask you right now to just feel the sensations in your right hand, what does it feel like to have a right hand? That doesn't take so much effort. You just kind of inclined the mind there. It was just a slight amount of effort. And so this kind of more of this receptive style allows this more just a light amount of effort that then we can be more continuous, or have this more consistent and perseverance with this light amount of effort that allows this momentum to build. Because if we are trying to have a particular experience, if we're trying to avoid something, there's a way in which we will over-effort. There's a way in which we will strain or strive to get rid of that discomfort in the knee, or get rid of the sound of the neighbor's dog barking. Have you ever tried to do that? Right, there's a way in which we are often like, oh, I could meditate if only that sound weren't happening. There's a way in which, and then we try to strain even harder to, just be with this. And not noticing that actually what we could do is just be with annoyance feels like this. And just be with that experience, kind of receive or be tuned into in a subtle way. Frustration feels like this. Irritation feels like this. and just turn it into that's what's being known next. And that way we don't have to fight with what's happening, and we don't have to over effort. We don't have to strain and strive. I have told this story quite a few times, but there was a time when I was on a long retreat, and I just somehow got it in my mind that I had to work harder, work harder, work harder. It didn't matter what I was doing. It was not enough for this sense of just being insufficient, whatever I was doing. I got a little crazy. I just got a little, I'll just say this, that I just got so tense and irritated. I ended up hating everybody and everything. It was just oh, I'm trying to meditate. And the teachers, after weeks they were watching me do this, they're like, okay, Diana, just stop. Just go out for a hike. You need to be out walking in nature for hours. I'm like, oh, okay. I just hadn't realized how I was just straining and striving, and I don't know, I just felt like that's what I was supposed to do on a long meditation retreat. But it's not like that. Instead, it's more no, we just have build this momentum, and then, especially on retreats, it's not only while you're sitting, but it's while you're getting up from the sit, and then you're walking, and then eating, and everything is like that. So it can be helpful to just have in mind this sense that with practice, to see if the mind itself is relaxed. There's this way in which we can notice, what does it feel like when the mind is relaxed? There's this sense of spaciousness and this sense of ease. There's also, but implicit in that, and this is also really subtle, is this sense of trusting that the next object of mindfulness is going to arise. We don't have to go get it. We can just be receptive, and it's going to arise. The next sound, the next bodily sensation. If we're practicing in this way, that's open awareness. Maybe I should have said that earlier. This is a different, with this receptive way of practicing, we're not choosing the different objects, we're just allowing the objects to arise. You can also do this flavor of kind of receptive awareness. If the breath, there's a way you can incline the mind towards the breath, but also a way in which you're receiving it instead of going out there and jumping on it or grabbing it. So if you notice that the mind is not relaxed, what are some of the things that you can do? Or if you notice there's some efforting, one thing is maybe just take a breath, a larger breath, and just kind of with this big exhale and get embodied back into feel the bodily experience. And then just rest attention on what's happening in the body, this moment. Because often the straining is not in this moment. It's about, I have to get somewhere, or I have to avoid something. So that's one thing to do. Maybe this can remind oneself that, no, we just have to take this practice one moment at a time. We just have to meet the next moment. That doesn't take very much effort, just the next moment. For me, on those long retreats, this is something I do not recommend, that I was there for a number of months, and then, we just meditate all day, so it's hundreds of meditation periods, right? And I was counting down, 624 more to go. And I was just making myself crazy. It says that we just have to just meet the next moment. That's all. That's all that's being asked, just the next moment. And there's a way in which that doesn't feel burdensome and it doesn't feel oppressive. Just just the next moment. And then it can be helpful there's a way in which, with meditation practice, there can be a way that the attitude that we have, that we're bringing towards meditation practice, can have a big impact. And so it can be helpful to have a sense of like, well, why not? Okay, I'll just be present for this. Like, why not? Because sometimes, often what happens is we might have this little rebellious, or maybe I should speak for myself, sometimes I have this rebellious like attitude. Like, I don't want to simply because somebody told me to, or because it's what I'm supposed to do or something. I often have this little bit of a resistance. But what would it be like to just like, well, why not? I'll just give it a go. I'm just going to be present for the next moment. Why not? Just the next moment. So these ways are these attitudes in which can be a big support. And the way that we are, being able to sustain meditation practice, not only during the meditation period, but at home, when we bring this at home. Because there's a way in which we might have this sense that to practice, maybe in English, it's often we have this sense to practice is to exert oneself. So even we use this language, right? I have a meditation practice or something like that. But having this steadiness with the attention can be really beneficial. Because we start to see what our minds do. We start to understand some of the attitudes of the mind, or we start to recognize some of the habits and patterns of the mind. If we can bring mindfulness to more and more parts of our life, or just even more consistently during a meditation period, if there's a certain amount of mindfulness, then we're less likely to be completely lost in thought and out in wherever it is that the mind likes to go. So to help support practicing with a balanced amount of effort, I've been talking about not too much striving. Maybe I'll just say also the opposite of too much striving can be this kind of like a lackadaisical kind of sense of okay, mindfulness, I'll get to it later. But right now I'm having this juicy thought, or I have to solve this problem, or I have to remember the grocery list, or I'm going to indulge in this fantasy or something. It's not uncommon also to have this idea a little bit later. I know I'm supposed to be mindful, but I'll do it later. And I hadn't really noticed how also early in my meditation practice I would do this until I heard a talk by Joseph Goldstein. He's one of the elders in this tradition. And he has this expression, more or less mindful, kind of mindful. More or less. A little bit lost in thought and a little bit present. And he was pointing to, why not just be completely present? There's a way in which it can be really supportive for our life and for our practice. So what can support this balanced effort is, one way is to just learn what are our patterns. What are our patterns that we bring to tasks in general? Often they're these patterns, or some of the attitudes that we bring aren't necessarily obvious, but they're having an impact on us. Because there might be a way in which you could even just inquire, when you realize that I was going to be talking about efforting, was there a subtle sense that you said oh great, I know that I need to effort more. I want to hear how much I need to effort more. Or maybe you have this idea oh, really, effort? I feel overwhelmed already with all the stuff I have to do. I have to apply effort to practice? Or maybe you had a response, something like, what is she talking about? I don't even really know this whole idea of effort. I just sit down and meditate. So maybe those three are three different extremes, but just notice like what kind of an attitude you have towards effort. I know I told you about how like I was over efforting, and I see how this shows up in other areas of my life. Just recently I was doing a hike with a friend, and it was a long hike. For me, it was a long hike. And, the last bit, I was tired. And so I was like walking faster. I got to finish this thing. I got to, push to get this thing through, finished to get there. And my friend was like, why are you walking so fast? I just want to be done. So there's this kind of like my way of pushing, but some other people, might have a different way. That when there's a sense of I need to do something. So one way to have balanced effort with your meditation practice is just to be aware of what are your patterns. What are ways that you often are showing up when there's something to be done? And just knowing about it can maybe help sensitize you to noticing when you find yourself doing something like that in your meditation practice. You don't have to change it, you don't have to make it different, but there's a way in which just knowing what some of our patterns are can be really helpful. Just as I said, kind of sensitize it. And maybe I'll say that if you notice that there's like a lot of like striving or wanting to attain things, it might be that there's some fear underneath that's fueling that. Might be, might not be too, but it might be a little bit of fear of backsliding or fear of feeling regret if I don't really put all this effort in, or a fear of missing out, or a fear of becoming a slug and people taking advantage of me or something like this. So maybe there's some fear that's underneath this driving pattern. Or maybe there's doubt that's underneath maybe this more, I'll use this word, lackadaisical pattern. Maybe there's doubt about, is this really what I should be doing? Is this valuable? Is this just a sense of hesitation? Maybe I can't even really do this. Maybe this is not what's best for me, or something like that. And these are just things to consider, to be curious about. You don't have to find the answer to this, but again, sometimes recognizing that what's underneath fueling some of our patterns can help take some of the authority out of these patterns. So something else that can support having a balanced effort is to remind ourselves of, why are you doing this in the first place? Maybe I should reword that. Because maybe to tune into, what are your aspirations? Like, what is it that's motivating you or inspiring you? Because sometimes it can be like we're just wanting to feel better, and we're doing anything we can, so we're trying to avoid what's uncomfortable and chase what's pleasant. I mean, that works when it works until it doesn't, but most of the time it doesn't. And this practice is about just learning to have some steadiness no matter what's arising. So maybe to have some balanced effort is to tune into, again, our aspirations of why we're practicing. This wish for greater freedom, this wish for greater ease or peace or whatever it might be for you. Something else that can help with having a balanced sense of effort is to check in with the way that our sense of ourself is tied in with how much efforting we do. Again, and this is tied in with our patterns. But we could just drop in a question. We could ask ourselves, who would I be if I weren't making this amount of effort? Who would I be if I weren't making this amount of effort? I know this is an odd question, but it's something that you just drop in and then maybe just listen to see if there's any answers. So we don't have to find the answers. We don't have to look for the answers. We're just dropping in a question, and it's a way of kind of just bringing some curiosity to the experience. Because there's often a way that our sense of self is really tied up with, well, I'm the one who gets things done, or I'm the one who often leaves things undone, or I'm the one that procrastinates a lot, or there's a way in which we might have part of our identity could be related to effort. And part of what this practice points to is to have a flexible identity, not to identify just only one way. Maybe it's appropriate to have a lot of effort or in certain situations, but not in other situations. And can we have this flexibility? So whatever you recognize about yourself, about your patterns, or this idea of who you would be if you weren't making that amount of effort, the point is to just meet it with kindness. Just to meet it with compassion and awareness, like, oh, okay. This practice is so much about just understanding ourselves better and understanding how some of the ways in which we constrict our possibilities and some of the ways in which we blame ourselves or beat ourselves up. And that's not the way that's going to support having a practice and having a life that is nourishing and supportive. So with this inquiries, there's no need to be harsh on ourselves. We're just maybe being anthropologists in some kind of way and just learning about ourselves and how we're showing up in the world. So wise efforting. Often it can be this sense of like receiving objects, and that can be just with open awareness with whatever object it is. Sound, bodily sensation, breath, thought, emotion. Or there can be a sense if we're doing like a combination of directed and received. Like I'm going to do mindfulness of the sensations of breathing, but there's a way in which we're receiving them instead of going out and getting them. And this is a subtle movement, but it allows some more sustainability with meditation practice. So that when the bell rings, there's just like, oh, bell, just noticing the sounds, and then realizing, oh yeah, that's the end, and opening your eyes, instead of holding on like, when is this going to be over? So I'll end there and open it up to see if there's some questions or comments. Right back here.
My question is, for me personally, I find I'm most at peace when I'm not making any effort and just kind of like resting, chilling out, relaxing. So not efforting maybe in a good one, efforting in a bad way, but just not efforting at all and just kind of like being there. I find that, at least for me personally, everybody's different, but that's when I feel the most mindful.
And can you describe, like, what is the experience of mindfulness for you then?
Resting.
Resting.
Just completely chilling out, not trying to be anything or anyone. And I find in those moments when I'm not efforting at all, I don't do it that often, to be honest, but every once in a while, like if I'm at the beach or there's a sunset, or maybe I'm with a friend who I really care about, and there's like a moment where I find like I'm just not efforting at all. I'm just resting in that moment. And I find that's when I feel like I'm the most awake.
So just being present for what's happening.
Yeah, just letting go of everything and just kind of just being there, you know.
Nice, nice. So maybe that's pointing to kind of like just the receptive, just being with whatever there is right there.
Because sometimes I tend to overthink the spiritual path, like think that I can think my way into more peace. And I feel the best when I'm just keeping it the most simple,
Yeah.
the simpler. So.
Great, I appreciate that. Simple is good. Yeah. Thank you. Anybody else have a comment or question? I think.
Hi, I'm Jay. I think this all goes back to a time when there was no writing, right? It was an oral tradition, there was no writing at all.
That's right.
So my question is this, which is, and I've been I know once now, experimenting with this. When I'm meditating, I can track my thoughts on paper, right? We tend to not do it in this tradition. So I'm just curious if there's any value or have people tried it. Meaning, as I'm meditating, let's say a distracting thought comes, and then I write it down, then I go back to the breath. Wait, maybe I get distracted, I forget about it, then I come back, and I can. So I was wondering if there's any value in that, or is it like there's some inherent value in not doing it, which is why people don't do it.
I see.
Yeah.
Well, I haven't done this practice, so I don't know. Can you tell me what happens after? So you have a thought, then you write it down, and what happens after you write it down?
So then when I finish, I go and look, and it looks like a crazy, like there's no, for me, when I look, there's no pattern, or there's no, I think the craziness of it jumps out. Yes. Like, my God, what is this? All over the map, And I've done it just like 3 or 4 times. It's just to see what that feels like. Like, I was concerned that it would, it would disturb my sit, right? It's not a solid 30-minute sit because I'm going in and out. But just wanted to see what the effect was. And whether over time, if I did it, it might actually help me be more mindful. I don't know what the long-term effect is if I keep trying it. And have people done it, because I rarely hear anybody doing it. It's just like, it doesn't matter. The reason is because sometimes a whole sit can go and I'm barely there. If I don't do this, I feel like I've lost 30 minutes, and I'm gone. Or maybe I'll come back like 3 times, for the whole sit.
Yeah, I can see that part of the value is we start to see, you use the word craziness, the craziness of our thoughts. Yeah, it's helpful to see for them to lose some of their authority. Because often, thoughts, we feel like, oh, they're so important, we have to pay attention to them, and we're going to solve something. But when we really start to look at the content, we start to see, oh, there's a tremendous amount of repetition, and there's this tremendous amount of, going all these different places, and maybe your writing it down helped to see that. And so in this tradition, we don't write them down, but I could see where it would be helpful to just recognize maybe like the I like this word craziness, right? Because when we really start to pay attention, we start to see that. So, and then maybe the allure of being lost in thought starts to go away, starts to diminish, and then we can just say, oh, I might as well just be here with this moment. Thank you, Jay. Yeah. I don't have a good reason why we don't.
Yeah, and the reason I mentioned the original context was I was wondering if writing was available at that time. Maybe Buddha would have said, write it down or something.
I see.
So I don't know. No, I just speculated.
Yeah, so writing existed, but it wasn't, it was used just by a few people for accounting purposes, for like merchants or, for taxes or something like this. And it was really considered certainly not anything that people used to share information, or certainly not in a religious context or something like that. That didn't happen until hundreds of years later.
Hi. So I think in the talk at some point you mentioned this idea of there's a time for meditations where you can focus on an object, and then there's time, kind of juxtaposing that, there's meditations where you just try and accept what is. I feel like my practice has been haphazard. Sometimes I am accepting, and then other times I'm trying to focus. curious, what's maybe a good way to think about, like, when is it a time for, the more focused meditation versus the accepting, or maybe
Yeah.
other kinds, but.
Yeah, great. Thank you. That's a good question. I would say that it differs for different people. For some people, to be more relaxed and receptive just works best for them, and that's their entire practice. That they don't have this more focused, choose an object and stay in the object. They might say that the object is awareness itself. So they might say like the object is, I'm using this awareness, and then they're noticing like, oh, here's a sound, like here's a sensation, here's another sound or something like this. So they're just being aware of awareness, we could say. And some other people would say, no, I'm just going to like choose like the breath, for example. I'm just going to stay on the breath, 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 breath. So this one, aware of awareness, is more receptive, and the more object-oriented one is a little bit more directed. And so often people will do a little bit more directed to help the mind settle, because that takes a little bit more effort. So if you're feeling like, oh my gosh, this mind is everywhere and I can't settle down, they might like stay with the breath for a certain duration until certain settledness arise, and then open up and just like receive. Some people will do the opposite. They want to just okay, the mind's all over the place. I'm not even going to try to direct it. I'm just going to notice what's happening. And they'll have a little bit more receptive. And then there starts to be a little bit of settling. And then they want to get concentrated. So then they'll choose a particular object and just stay with that. So my answer, I guess, is like different people have different propensities, I would say. Some people, it's easier to be with just like awareness and having a bunch of different objects as opposed to just one different object. And I'll say it also depends on, if your objectives, if you want to get concentrated. Yeah, having said that, you can get concentrated both ways.
Thank you.
Yeah, maybe I'll also say.
Think of it that way. So.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I didn't think of it that way.
You didn't think you had a different question that I'm not even answering?
No, you are.
Oh.
I didn't think of it that you could, I thought you kind of pick one type or one style throughout the meditation, and realize that even like awareness itself could be the object.
Yeah.
But.
Great. Thank you. Anybody else have a comment or question? Okay, so thank you all, and I wish you a lovely rest of the evening. Thank you.